Hi, I'm Charles, your host for Charles Weekly Parti, and today we are back with a full episode. Before I get started, let's roll the intro. Welcome to another episode. I know last week you may have seen the Happy 4th of July. What's the word for it? The Happy 4th of July bonus episode, and as I mentioned then, the truth of the matter is I was feeling a little bit worn down, and in order for me to release the best content that I can, occasionally there are times that I end up having to take a little bit of a break. So, unfortunately, I hadn't quite figured that out as early as I had otherwise hoped, but here it got to that point, and I made the judgment call. I said that I wanted to get a little bit of an episode, but not a full episode, because the full episodes do take significantly longer to produce. I know I've mentioned this a couple of times, but in all seriousness, I'd like to take a moment and thank everyone for voting in the in the My Roadcast competition. And I know that there are quite a few people who did take the time and vote for it. And big thank you to those of you who did. It really means a lot. And I'd like to just let everyone know that by the time I release the next episode, I will know what the status of the competition is, because they will be announcing the winners this coming week. So, by next episode, I'll be able to give you an update. Now, an episode wouldn't be complete without actually talking about architecture or technology, and today I'm talking about both. And given the fact that we've been in a pandemic for long enough, I think I should pick at least one time to talk a little bit about a piece of architecture that relates to health. And this is going to be that week, because I'm talking about the Health Innovation Hub. I almost called it Health Innovation Lab. It is a hub because it's an interesting little project, I guess is the best way to put it. Now, this Health Innovation Hub was designed by John McCaslin and partners, and it is located in Lancaster in the United Kingdom. So, for starters, the building was designed to bring together academics and local service providers, and the academics being from Lancaster University, to put... we'll figure out the best way to put this. They wanted to put the research and the people carrying out the research into the same facility, so that there could be decent collaboration with one another. There's the word. And within the building, you have every type of usable space imaginable. You have an auditorium, there are collaboration areas, there are small offices, there are lab spaces, a little bit of everything. And to fit all that space, they had to build a 5-story building. Believe it or not, and until I read about that particular component of it, I didn't even think that it was 5 stories, because the way it's put together, it doesn't look like it's 5 stories high. It looks, I think, like it's 3 stories. So how they managed to stick an extra 2 floors in there is pretty amazing. The other advantage of having a 5-story building is that you're able to create little areas that connect multiple different levels. And that is exactly what the architects did. There's one really good shot of a connection between 3 different floors. And then skylights, you could actually see another floor right above that. So whether you want to say that connects 3 floors or sort of connects a 4th, it's up to that's something that's in the point of view of the viewer, I guess. Now, in order to have any good building, you do have to have site relationships, and I usually like focusing on this a lot because if the building and the site do not sort of jive together, it doesn't really work out well. And once again, I've picked something to go over that has great interactions between the site and its surroundings. First and foremost, some of the building paths actually lead to paths in the more natural areas around it. And the reason why this is so important is to really make the approach to the site tailored, so that it isn't just, oh, I'm walking up to, oh, there's a building here. How'd the building get here? Instead, it looks like the path, and it just looks like you keep on going on the path. Nature sort of fades away, and then you're left there with the building. And I'm not saying that there's no natural interaction with the building and the surroundings, and quite the contrary, actually. But it sort of melts away. Thinking back when I was a little kid, there's a TV show on, and what was the name of it? Anyway, the part of the premise of it was taking imagination into effect and going from real life and morphing into another area and to whatever fantasy land they were going to at that point. And this site sort of does the same thing. When you're going between the two, it fades you out of one and into the other, and whichever way you're going. So if you're going from nature, the trees sort of melt away, leaving you with the building there. And if you're going the other way around, the building sort of melts away and leaves you with the natural surroundings. And I think that's actually quite amazing, just the way it does that. The other thing that I think that really caught my eye was how the building slopes work with the landscapes around it. It's easy enough to have to build a building and have it go and work with multiple levels, but to make that connection meaningful takes a little bit of skill. What was done at the Health Innovation Hub is, for the area that goes down slopes, the paneling also slopes with it, so that it looks like the building and the land move together. And I don't know how to say it, but it makes you wonder whether the hill slopes to work with the building, or if the building slopes to work with the land. And that, I think, is a sign of a great interaction, because you can't, in your head, you know which way everything was made to work with, but it still makes you wonder that. I think that's quite impressive. Last, I'd like to note out that some of the building's sightlines actually work quite well with one another. So it's easy enough. It's easy enough to just plop down a building in the middle of a plot of land. But to make that placing of the building meaningful takes a good chunk of skill. But to have the sight lines work with the landscape, and when I'm talking about sight lines, I'm not talking about the sight lines from inside of the building, the SIGHT lines, although those are pretty great too. Every spot that has a view outside, it all works together well. There's not a bad view from inside of that building. That's how well thought it was. No, but the sight lines I'm talking about are the SITE sight lines. Having sort of different areas of building have different languages, but also that line, imaginary virtual line, whatever you want to call it, that line that separates the building also separates the landscape leveling. So on one side of the line is one sort of level of ground, and on the other side of the line is another side. And sure, some people are probably thinking that that's not really a big deal. But in fact, it is. I mean, I can't say enough how making sure that the building works with the landscape is a big deal. Because whether or not you think about it, it's a subconscious realization whether something works with the land it's on or if it doesn't. Because if it doesn't work on the land or work with the land that it's at, then the building then it doesn't feel quite right. But when it does, you can tell everything's just smoothly working together. Now, before I finish talking about this building, I do want to share some of my thoughts on it. I really like parts of the building, but at the same time, I do have a couple of complaints. And complaints don't have anything to do with the site relations, because everything on that end works out fine. And realistically speaking, I have exactly one big complaint about it, because once I saw something, looking at some of the pictures, I couldn't unsee it. So, the material palette that was used with this building was phenomenal. It works with the building, its purpose, and the landscape. Feels like it's a very natural material palette, and I'd almost say a little bit more commonplace right about now. Having a sort of white color and then a chosen sort of tone of wood grain. But how it's applied makes a lot of difference. And the bronze panels that I mentioned earlier are also on other parts of the building, and the way that and I'm sorry, I called those bronze panels. They're bronze colored, but they're actually made of aluminum. But the paneling on the outside exists over some of the windows in a little bit of a seemingly randomized pattern, although I think it can tell that there's a little bit of there's some purpose behind it. I just can't tell what it is. But the way it looks in the pictures, the way it looks, all I can think of is that the building looks like some of the windows are boarded up. And I'm sure there are other people who probably don't see it that way, but when I look at it, that's the first thing I see. And I guess what that dwells on is the importance of renders, because obviously the fact that it was built means that the client saw it and they were fine with the way it was. And that this is also on the other side of the ocean from me, so I can guarantee you, my thought processes do not apply to 99% of the world. But aside from that, I think if someone had figured out a different way to apply the paneling, it would have been a lot better. But it is what it is, and as long as it's not something I'm going to be seeing every day, and this is where I also atone to the fact of beauty being in the eyes of the beholder. Because throughout our lives, we're going to see things that we do like, we're going to see things that we don't like. And that's one of the beauties of architecture, because there are so many different people involved in the field. And no two people are going to really design the exact same building for the exact same site. One person might come up with one idea, one person might come up with another. But really, having that variety also means that for all of us, as you can see, I'm not a big fan of the way certain pieces of this building look. But to others, and especially the client, because if the client had found this as a problem, they would not have gone through with it. Having different things that some people do like and some people don't like is really what makes architecture so special. As much as I'd like to keep talking about architecture for a while, I do need to shift gears because, there are a couple of interesting technology developments that I just can't leave out of this episode. The first being the new Google Antitrust lawsuit. So this lawsuit was filed by 36 states plus Washington, D.C., and it's actually quite similar to the Apple versus Epic trial, because it's targeting the 30% fee that that Google charges on their App Store. I went over all the changes, how it's 15% for the first million and then 30% afterwards. But this is targeted. The changes that they've made are actually targeted at a couple of applications that actually go and make over the million, which, as you could probably guess, means that there's a lot of money on the line. So the recent policy is that certain apps, and I think this actually ended up applying to Netflix as well, as one of the things. There are some apps that sidestep the in-app payment solution. So instead of running off of whomever's app store, you operate off of their website. So one pretty big example of this would be Adobe, which I use to produce this podcast. So for Adobe software, if you get the license on your computer, if you go on to, let's say a tablet, is Photoshop on the iPad is one of the little things that I use. Having Photoshop on the iPad, the way it works is when I sign in, it detects that I have a license for it and unlocks the full capabilities and doesn't say, you don't have ability to use this. Whereas if you don't, you get told to buy a subscription. I think you can buy it through the App Store, but I know for sure that if you have the plan on if you have the all apps plan, that it'll carry it over no problem, and they don't need to get a pay cut from Apple operating. But the whole thing is creating something that prevents you from sidestepping that could prove to be a pretty big problem. And part of the reason why this is a problem is if someone's going to be charged 30% more, especially for something like Netflix, if they're going to be charged 30% more, guess who they have to try and pass that cost on to? They're going to pass it on to their consumers. And they can do that in the form of making everyone pay for more stuff, or having a special surcharge to go off of, or to work on the App Store. So how this will unfold in the future, we have yet to see. But personally, I don't think it's a great idea, actually, or completely preventing people from sidestepping this, because the moment you force people to do it, that means the moment a developer is forced to do it, they'll try and raise the rates a little bit to make up for the extra loss that they're encountering. The other thing that this particular lawsuit's going to be looking at is the fact that Google was trying to keep Samsung from really pushing for the Galaxy Store, and considering that you can see the Galaxy Store if you have a Samsung device, they didn't actually go for. So that's where that ends up falling. But before I conclude the episode, there's one more big thing I need to talk about, and that is ransomware. So in a recent ransomware attack targeted at, I think it's Kaseya, is how to pronounce it. Basically, what happened was a hacking group called ReEvil went and hacked into Kaseya's systems, and utilizing the, I think it's the system that pushes updates to customers, utilized that system to go and distribute malware, which ransomware, which encrypts files and holds them hostage until, as the name would imply, a ransom is paid. The ransom they're requesting is pretty darn high, at not 100, at $70 million. That's a pretty big chunk of change. So, because of the scope of this attack, because Kaseya manages remote access application for for quite a few customers, this ended up taking out thousands of computers. And because of its scope, it actually went and put a couple of businesses into a pinch too. If you think about it, pretty much every purchase that you make these days is done electronically, right? I'm not talking as much about the mom and pop stores where where you could run into an older cash register, and even some of those are starting to switch gears and go into the digital era. But most of the world is actually all running on computerized systems. So when the computer running your cash register decides to run into trouble, let's just say it makes it kind of hard to continue to do sales, because if the computer system won't work with that, there's no real other way to do it. And especially with the technology reliance of using plastic to pay for things, because that is a computerized process. From the moment that you slide, dip, or tap, you're triggering a set of computer processes to take care of paying for the goods that you have. And that's the word I want to use here. The really tricky part on that is that no matter how you look at it, there are bad things that happen with every ransomware attack, and there's only one real way to combat it. There are a couple of other notes I have before I talk about how to really prevent the or how to what the my brain's at a shortage of words here, but what exactly the um, prevention is for ransomware. But before I go over that, I do need to go over one of the ways in which this sort of ties into architecture. Because the CEO of Kaseya, um, Fred Vicola, I'm probably not pronouncing his name correctly, but it, that's what I get for reading about these things, pointed out that the people that were most affected by this ransomware attack weren't big company or weren't as many big companies, but a lot of smaller ones. And pointed out that there are a lot of said that most of the people whose computers were affected were small businesses such as, and here's where I'm going to quote him, dental practices, architecture firms, plastic surgery centers, libraries, and things like that. End quote. I know what you're thinking. Ransomware attack affecting a lot of these sort of businesses, but architecture firms and dental practices, all that sort of thing, that's not good. Having your let's say you've been working on building plans for the last 5 months. If that computer that has those plans gets locked up because of that, and you can't, and you need to pay a ransom to get it, or pray that someone else is going to pay a ransom, then you're in trouble. Because otherwise, you're not going to be able to get your if you don't have any backup of it, no one's going to be able to get that without paying the ransom. And with this, I'm going to bring up my point of how to keep ransomware from getting to you. And one step before that is how to make sure that if ransomware does get to you, how to make sure that it's not going to ruin your day. Because everyone needs to have some system to make sure that they're protected against this, myself included. First and foremost is to create frequent backups. If something's properly backed up, the building that your primary file is in could burn to the ground, have nothing recoverable from it, and you should still have that file. So the trick with backing trick is always to back things up. So if the equipment that your file is on fails, you're covered. If someone hacks that system, you're covered. If someone hacks your network, you're covered. Basically, make sure that no matter what, you're going to have one copy of data. And for that, I'll briefly mention the 3-2-1 backup rule. The 3-2-1 backup rule stipulates that you should have at least 3 copies of the file. And of those 3 copies, you should have at least two of those copies should be on different forms of media. And the one is that you should have 1 copy offsite. So what that means is if you have a file on your hard drive or your computer's main hard drive, you should also have a copy of it on something like a flash drive that's a different form of storage and also sort of separately located. It's a different device. And ideally 1 more copy that's off-site. And this could be anything from a cloud solution like OneDrive or Google Drive or iCloud, or something like keeping a backup drive in a bank's safe deposit box. Because pretty much guarantee you that a safety deposit box that you can get at a bank is going to be stored in a fireproof vault to make sure that if the rest of the building burns down, that whatever is in those deposit boxes stays safe. So, as long as if you're following that rule, your computer could light itself on fire, and you should still have your files. Might not be a great day for your computer, might set you back a little bit, but no matter what, if you're set back on having to replace computer equipment, that can be quite trivial in comparison to the data that's on that computer. And especially with certain types of files, like family photos, some of that can be priceless. So that's how I'm going to finish off, I guess, having my parti for the week being make sure that you're taking steps to prevent being hit with ransomware. And now I realized what the other thing was that I was going to mention. Standard security practices when you're on a computer. Don't click any strange links. If someone sent you a file that you weren't expecting, don't open it. Check with them, ideally via some other form of communication. So if someone sends you a suspicious email, give them a phone call or a text so that it's significantly less likely that someone's going to, that you're talking with the actual person instead of someone who may have hacked their account. And don't go to any suspicious or possibly malicious websites. Right? Try and stay on the up and up on the websites, and you should be good. And also as long as you're following legal ways to get software, you should also be good on that respect. So that's how I'm going to close off today. Take steps, make sure you don't get hit with ransomware, because that, no matter what, that is not going to make your day great. So I do hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you haven't already subscribed, please be sure to. And you can always go to anchor.fm/CharlesWeeklyParti, where you can listen to every episode as well as finding a link to your favorite podcast platform. You can interact with the podcast by leaving voice messages, and if you choose, you can also support the podcast. Also, if you're using Apple Podcasts, please be sure to leave a review if you enjoyed this episode. And last but not least, if you want to see the action, you can always see the action on YouTube. So, hope you had a good time today, and be safe, stay safe, take care.